Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I would echo what the mayor said in terms of Baltimore, and we're blessed to have Mayor Pugh as our mayor. I worked with her when she was Senator Pugh in Annapolis, and then now Mayor Pugh. She understands business, she understands technology, and she's a real blessing to our city. I want you now to go back with me to the year 1968. The year 1968. Many of you here are probably too young to remember that year, but if you Google it, you'll find that in that year, we had a lot of turmoil in our country. We had the assassination of Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy. We had our cities on fire. And we had the election of President Nixon, Richard Nixon. And if you looked at the country at the time, you would have thought that our democracy was about to go down, to go under. And many of us did. There was so much anxiety in the country at the time. And I remember as a young kid in South Baltimore and Cherry Hill, meeting in our church. And my grandfather, who was a leader in the Baptist church at that time, we were all anxious and afraid and not sure what to do. And my grandfather said back then, he said, one day we will all die. And we were like, Granddaddy, what are you talking about? One day we will die. And what he was trying to get us to see is that the problems that we were facing compared to the reality of life, they were small. And we had to have the right perspective at the time to make that happen. And we thought at the time that Granddaddy was crazy, but he wasn't. Because years later, in the year 2005, a young tech entrepreneur got the opportunity to give the commencement address at Stanford University. And there he said, and I quote, he said, "Remembering that I will be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices of life." That young man, that young tech entrepreneur was Stephen Jobs. And he was at the time battling cancer. But he put it in perspective in terms of what he had accomplished as a tech entrepreneur and how we compare that to the realities of life that we face daily, on a daily basis. And so what Granddad taught me, and what Stephen Jobs, one of my tech heroes, taught me, was that three things. Number one, life is short. Number two, you need to build a sense of urgency in your life if you're going to accomplish great things. And number three, he said, that we must learn to work together and stay focused on what is important. And so as I look at my career as a tech entrepreneur and as a family man and community leader, I have taken that lesson to heart. And I have applied it in my personal life and my business life. And what comes out of that for me is this. There are three things that we must focus on every single day. Because today may be your last day. And so if you operate as if today is your last day, then those three things that we talked about will become real to you. Because one day, that day will be your last day. So what are those three things? Well, I have broken it down into three areas, right? Number one is intensity of purpose. Intensity of purpose. Number two is intensity of persevering. Intensity of persevering. Number three, and most important, intensity of perspective. Intensity of perspective. And so time will not allow me to go into great detail in all three categories because John has told me my time is limited, and I respect John. So what I plan to do is to touch upon the first two, intensity of purpose, perseverance, but spend the bulk of my time talking about intensity of perspective. Because I have learned in business and in life that if you and I can master the art of perspective, that it will drive and give you perseverance, and it will keep you focused on your purpose. So far, so good? Okay, let's talk about purpose. Purpose is simply this, folks. It is why do you do what you do and who cares? Purpose. Why do you do what you do and who cares? If any of my friends in the room are unsure about their purpose, let me give you some guidance. Last year we had in Baltimore the uprisings. You all remember that? This year we had an election to elect our next president. If you peel back the onion of why we had the uprising and why this election was so contentious and so divisive in our nation, it's because of economic anxiety, economic hopelessness. And so if you look at how we solve economic anxiety and hopelessness, the ones who can solve that are the men and women in this room. They are the entrepreneurs, primarily in technology, who take these technologies, convert them into solutions that solve the problems of humanity. And in the process, they create jobs, they create wealth, and they build communities. That's our purpose. That's why I do what I do. When I look at my employees and I see them over the years and I see their children grow into adults and go to college and all these things, I see the impact that we have as entrepreneurs and scientists in this economy. That, my friends, is intensity of purpose, because you got to know what your purpose is to have that kind of understanding. Then there is perseverance. There's intensity of perseverance, and I call that grit. And we all in this room have all experienced the importance of perseverance. I call it grit. I was raised in South Baltimore, a place called Cherry Hill in the projects. Do you know that everything that I tried to do, people always told me I couldn't do it? When I was a young man in Cherry Hill, they told me I couldn't be an engineer. When I wanted to go to college, they told me I couldn't go to college, let alone an Ivy League college. When I wanted to start a business, they told me your mother and father were not in business, therefore you cannot be in business, Bob. When they told me I couldn't be an author to write books, everything I have done, my friends, they've told me I could not do. And that's where grit comes in. Because when everyone else tells you it's impossible, what grit says, it is possible. And therefore, you and I achieve despite the resistance, despite the negativity. We go on and do great and marvelous things. So that is intensity of purpose and perseverance. I want to spend the bulk of my time now on perspective. On perspective. Because, beloved, if you and I can get perspective right, the amount of opportunity we will see is amazing. And I'm excited to be a part of that process. So there are three things I want to talk to you about as it pertains to perspective. Perspective. Number one is this. In perspective, what we have to do is to challenge our biases. It's getting real quiet in here now. Challenge our biases and to become comfortable being uncomfortable. To challenge our biases and to be comfortable being uncomfortable. When I was at IBM, there was a documentary that we were shown. It was called What You Are is Where You Were When. What you are is where you were when. And what this documentary says basically is, you and I today, we are a composition, we are an addition of all the experiences that we've had in life. We were raised in a certain household, certain family, and we were, unfortunately, many of us, inherited biases, right? It's getting real quiet in here again. Inherited biases and acquired biases over your lifetime. Where do they come from? Where are they placed? There are racial biases. There are gender biases. There are class biases. There are religious biases. There are cultural biases. All these biases. Here is a test for you. If you look at your immediate circle of friends or relationships, if they all look like you, the same gender, the same culture, the same religion, the same class, then you, my friends, you are missing out on the greatness which is America. Because you are limiting yourself in terms of the resources that you and I will need to build our businesses. And that's a big, big mistake. I can tell you personally how I had to learn that lesson. When I was a systems engineer at IBM a long time ago. So long, John, I had hair on my head, big afro, right? I was a systems engineer at IBM, large systems, one of the few African Americans in that group. One day we get notice that we're getting a new SEM. SEM meant back in the old days, Systems Engineering Manager, okay? So far, so good. But then I learned that the new guy we were getting was a middle-aged white guy from Mississippi, from the state of Mississippi. Now, that may not mean much to you, but my parents were in the civil rights movement. They marched in 1963 on the March in Washington. I was a student of the civil rights movement. I was very clear on what comes out of the state of Mississippi. So when I heard that my new manager, John, was a middle-aged white guy from the state of Mississippi, I said, oh my goodness, I am toast. So my dad said to me, he said, son, he said, give him a chance. Give him a chance. So the first meeting I had with my SEM, Sam, his name was Sam, I walk in the office, and the first thing he says to me is, come on in, bud. He called me bud. Now, I could see man or brother, bro, or dude, bud. Come on in, bud. I mean, Sam was the epitome. He was chain smoker, tobacco chewing, called you bud. I mean, he had all of the look. And I said, oh my goodness, I better turn my resignation down. But it turned out, as my dad told me, son, give him a chance. Sam Campbell became the best thing that ever happened to me. That man did more for me in my career than anyone else. And if I had allowed these biases to stop that relationship, I would have missed out on all that goodness that Sam Campbell provided me. And so, my friends, you must be careful with that you not allow yourself to be stymied by your biases. They must be challenged on every point, and you must go beyond them to reap the real benefit and greatness of what America is. And that is number one, challenging your biases and becoming comfortable being uncomfortable. If we are to build a great nation with great businesses, all of us must become more comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's how we grow and that's how we expand. The second thing I would tell you about perspective is to create the future and work backwards as you pivot your way to the present. Create the future, work backwards as you pivot your way to the present. One of the ways that you and I can control the future is to create the future. If I'm the creator, my chances of controlling it are a lot greater, John, a lot greater. And so we must seek to take these technologies that are emerging out of the labs and be the one that really makes it happen. Because to control the future, if I can create it, my chances to control it will be much greater. I have a new book coming out next year. It's called Pivot Point Intelligence. Pivot Point Intelligence. And it talks about how businesses, successful businesses, have been able to pivot in their business strategy as the environment has changed. And therefore, you pivot, you change direction without losing momentum or value. I call that pivot point intelligence. Let me give you an example of how we've used that in Biff Group. So as you know, we started in information technology about 20 years ago. About 7 years ago, we started Biff Energy. And once again, everyone told me, Bob, you can't do energy. You're an IT company. How can you do energy, right? Because we were able to pivot into that new environment. So we pivoted from IT into energy services. We pivoted from energy, focusing on energy engineering, into financial engineering. Because see, what we do as engineers and scientists, we get enamored with the technology, the speed, the feed. Oh man, this is sexy, it's exciting. Oh man, I love this. We fail to remember what drives the deals is the money, the financing. So when we learned in Biff Energy to focus on the financial engineering versus the energy engineering, then we were able to grow our company. The first year we installed 4 solar panels. Last year we have installed more than 250,000 solar panels. Because we were able to pivot into a new direction where there was new value and new opportunity. So I'm saying to you, beloved, that what you need to do, you and I, is create the future, work backwards, and pivot your way back to the present. So now what we do is, our energy company now is on the verge of being larger, more profitable than our IT company, because we were able to pivot into that new technology. So now not only are we doing solar, we're doing microgrids and battery backup storage and all these emerging technologies, because we understand the importance of creating the future and then working backwards. And so that would be the second point about perspective. My third point and last point, because I know you all want to get networking and you want to, hey Pam, how are you? You want to get networking and do your thing. As I move to my conclusion, the third point about perspective. You and I, to be successful long term, that's sustainable, we must be able to condition ourselves to see the light in the midst of darkness. To see the light in the midst of darkness. My friends, if you look at and study any technology or industry or whatever, it always starts with some woman or some man that sees the light before the masses do. It's called opportunity, right? And they marshal resources and all to take advantage of that reality. So the key to building businesses and growth is to condition yourself to see the light in the midst of darkness. My brother, I have 5 brothers, and they were all career military men. I was the first one to go to college, so I was the oddball in the family, okay? But I had one brother who was in Special Forces, and he would always talk about to us the point of ruling the night. Ruling the night. So in war, when you're fighting war, oftentimes the missions would occur at night. So what they had as an advantage was they had night goggles, night vision goggles. So while the enemy could not see at night, my brother and his peers, because of night vision goggles, they could see at night. And they could, in essence, control and rule the night because they could see the light. You know, I was reminded of that when I was, what wasn't mentioned was, in our company, we have a commitment, or it was mentioned, thank you for mentioning that, we have a commitment to humanitarian effort around the world, right? So we give a portion of our profit to do mission work around the world. We had built hospitals, clinics, water well systems, all these things we've helped to build throughout the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia. And we're not a very big company. We don't have much money, but what we do have, we're willing to give and willing to share. So on one of our trips here, we had built an orphanage in Tanzania, East Africa. And we'd gone back and forth to build the orphanage, and it was built. So I was on my last trip there, and I was planning to fly into Mount Kilimanjaro Airport in Tanzania. and I was going to visit the orphanage and then scale Mount Kilimanjaro. So I flew on KLM, flew into Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam into Mount Kilimanjaro Airport. Well, usually the flight gets in around 8 or 9 p.m. that evening, but it was delayed in Amsterdam. So we did not get into Tanzania until close to midnight. So we're flying into Tanzania. If you've ever been to emerging countries, the airports are kind of shaky. You never know what you'll find on the runway. And so we're coming into land, and the plane is descending down to land, and all of a sudden, the pilot, he guns the engines, and the plane takes off. He circles around, goes in a second time to land the plane. Now keep in mind, this is a few years after 9/11. So you ever notice on an airplane when things aren't going so well, how people get very quiet? They get very quiet. So the plane got really quiet, and he goes in for a second attempt to land the plane. He goes down, descends, and suddenly he guns the engines again, the plane takes off, and it goes around for one more try. And the pilot gets on the system, he says, I'm going to make one more attempt to land this plane. He said, if I'm unsuccessful, I will be required to reroute the plane to Mombasa, Kenya, which is on the coast of East Africa. So he goes in for a second, third landing, John, and he's going down, descending, and the plane seems to stall for a moment. And we're thinking, oh boy, we're going to Mombasa for the night, here we go. But then the plane goes down and down, descends, and finally it lands on the runway in Mount Kilimanjaro Airport. Now, most people were happy. We all clapped, and we were all happy that he was able to land the airplane. Most people were content to get off the plane, say thank you, and I'm done. But not Bob Wallace. Because Bob Wallace is from South Baltimore, right? He's a poly guy. He wants to know what happened. So I go to the pilot. I say, sir, what happened? He said, well, sir, when I came around for the first attempt to land, he said, all my computers said that the runway was there, but he said, I could not see the lights. He said, I was uncomfortable because in that part of Africa on airports, you might have sheep or goat on the runway, you never know. So he was uncomfortable, John. The second time he came around, he tried to land. He said, I came for a second time to land. He said, I tried to land, but he said, I could not see the lights. He said, the third time, I would try one more time. He came around the third time to land the plane. He came down, and it was fogs and clouds. It was a cloudy night, and he still could not see the lights on the runway. And just as he was about to take off for Mombasa, he said, I saw a flicker of a light. And that gave him the confidence to take that plane down and to land. My friends, as you leave here today, I'm convinced that many of you are flying your airplanes. You are flying your businesses. You've been doing this for years and years and years. You've made numerous attempts to land in a safe place with your business. But what you see now is clouds. You see clouds of uncertainty, clouds of lack of money, lack of technology changes, government regulation, John. All these clouds that get in the way. And what I'm saying to you is this, that when you and I, when we watch for opportunity and not look for it, then we will see that flicker of light that will give us the confidence to land our businesses in a safe place. So whenever you think about giving up, folks, think about that pilot, that KLM pilot that night in Tanzania. Number one, he had intensity of purpose. What was his purpose? To make sure that all 500 of us landed safely and didn't die in Africa. Number two, he had perseverance. He could have, on the first try, John, gone right away to Mombasa. But he tried 2, 3 times because his computer said that the runway was there. And the third thing, perspective. When you have perspective, my friends, then you can see that flicker of light of opportunity and be confident enough to take the risk. I hope that you remember that, as you look at your businesses and leave here today this conference. Thank you so very much. God bless you.